par for the course. Feel free to find some wall space somewhere where you'll feel comfortable. We'll actually begin the formal part of the program in about 13 and a half minutes. And so feel free to keep chatting amongst yourselves, and we'll have some music that we'll be listening to as well.
Well, just play this.
Yeah, I think that's the good thing. I don't think anyone can hear us.
No.
You sound great though. It's good. Just you're playing really loud. That's good.
I'm playing as loudly as possible.
Yeah, it's good. It's Brad.
Okay.
I don't know. There we go. 1 minute. Perfect. It's not all of it. But you know, that's just like, we have to go with the flow.
Oh, totally.
Slow grind scene.
Yeah,
I bet he went to the bathroom. That's what I bet. He's migraine guy, so he always goes to the bathroom. Why? Right? Oh yeah, that's no. It's one of the things. It just happens. I don't know. It's yeah. That's one of the things. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Just going to ask those people that are, there are some extra chairs that were opened up towards the back in case you don't have a place to sit. And appreciate everyone's attention and time. I want to thank Brenda Campbell and Isabel Rowland for their beautiful pieces of music that they were playing that you could hear. My name is Raju Heron. I'm going to be the MC for this event. This is a tremendous privilege and honor for me to be a part of this. And I want to thank everybody in the room, first of all, for making time to come. Obviously, you've all been touched or have touched Paul in a way that is very meaningful. And I think I can truly speak for the family that you represent a fraction of the people who Paul, I think, has genuinely touched in his life. It's important to understand, where the musical part plays a role as well. And so Isabel taught Mallory when she was learning music and to play viola, and Brenda was the accompaniment for that through the different parts of the pieces. So that's where that meaningful nature of that is. And so Brenda and Isabel, where are you? There they are. So thank you very much. I also want to thank all of the family and friends that are here. As I mentioned, there are people that haven't been able to come, and there is a live stream. And so they are also participating virtually. There are people that have come from all across Canada and through various parts of the world. There are also people that I know on the live stream are in every part of the world as well that are listening into this. In a way, I was trying to figure out how this is done. Do we do this as truly a celebration of life, which is, I think, important and think is the tact to take? And no doubt, this is something that is painful in a lot of ways too, because we're looking at the slides, or we're looking at him, we're looking at the way that we view him and our own personal experiences, and there's no doubt that that touches us in a way that we will have that resonate through, I think, the rest of our lives. Now, Paul was born in Ontario, and up until September 18th, 2021, I think he led a magical life. There are very few people who find genuine, true love. I think we all have these fantasies and think that one day this will happen to us, and it's amazing, Liz, when it happens. And the nature of Paul is what I'll be able to talk to you about. The photos that you were seeing in the slideshow were a representation of Paul from the beginning up until that date. And at the end of the ceremony, we'll be able to see some slideshow that carries on from that date to, unfortunately, when he passed away. One of the things that I was charged with was to talk to you about Paul. And Liz, I'm sorry to say, I know him better than you. I know him better than the WhatsApp chat group that had 256 people or something, and all these things. But I knew the real Paul. He was mean. He was a recluse, sedentary lifestyle. Yeah, he hated kids. Absolutely hated kids with a passion. He was withdrawn. Music, turn it off. Did not want to listen to music at all. He made adults cry. He made me cry. Is Scott Durham in the room? I saw Scott earlier. I think he made Scott cry, which is tough. But no, seriously, I think when you look at Paul, and the guy that I know had this amazing heart, one of the kindest souls, genuinely a smile that was infectious. And one of the things that I always wonder, how they say if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one here to hear it? Like, if Paul didn't have people around him, would he still be this amazing light? He would be. And my Typing 9 teacher said to me, Raju, you're a bright light in my class, but in a dark room, even a 10-watt bulb looks good. It took me a while to figure that one out. I was in grade 9, right? And when you're being compared to Fred Kozak, maybe Fred was the 10-watt bulb. I'm sorry. Now I feel like Ricky Gervais. So, no, I mean, amazing. A son, somebody who casts light and warmth on others, but also drew from their warmth and light and let it resonate in him. He operated on our daughter when she was small, and I think that that's one of those true signs as colleagues when you trust a peer to look after your own family and friends, and I trusted him completely. Early on in our careers, he would come up to me and ask, how can we look after something, and we'd work together. But it was always fun. And I think that's one of those things also, when you genuinely care about people and have a relationship with them, it's not work anymore. He was just a great, great guy. I don't know if you ever saw pictures of his COVID uniform. He looked like the alien out of the Predator movies, and then, he loved running, he loved hiking, he loved being active, he loved music, but more than that, he loved his family, he loved his wife. The greatest thing that I can say about my friend Paul is he served as an example to me of what we each aspire to become. Something noble, something kind, something that we strive to be a good person. Paul is a great person. Through the rest of these days, through the rest of this thing, we're going to be talking about different people who are going to have an opportunity to speak to Paul as they see him. And the first person that I'll ask is John Stevens, with the Anglican Church Bishop for BC, who's also a friend of the family, to lead us in a prayer.
Good morning. It's really great to be here. It's also really sad to be here, I've got to say. I had the great privilege, the great honor of spending some time with Paul just before he died, and to have conversations with him about spirituality, about the meaning of life, about the meaning of death, about the meaning of love, about family, about friends, about what happens when we die. Beautiful conversation, as you can probably imagine. And so it's also my great privilege to help us begin our ceremony today by thinking of things beyond this world, beyond ourselves, and to think about greater purposes. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to read essentially a poem. It's a blessing by John O'Donohue, if you know the name. It's called On the Death of the Beloved. Though we need to weep your loss, you dwell in that safe place in our hearts where no storm or night or pain can reach you. Your love was like the dawn, brightening over our lives, awakening beneath the dark a further adventure of color. The sound of your voice found for us a new music that brightened everything. Whatever you enfolded in your gaze, quickened by the joy of its being, you placed smiles like flowers on the altar of the heart. Your mind always sparkled with the wonder at things. Though your days were brief, your spirit was alive, awake, complete. We look toward each other no longer from the old distance of our names. Now you dwell inside the rhythm of breath, as close to us as we are to ourselves. Though we cannot see you with outward eyes, we know our soul's gaze is upon your face, smiling back at us from within everything to which we bring our best refinement. Let us not look for you only in memory, where we would grow lonely without you. You would want us to find you in presence, besides us when beauty brightens, when kindness glows and music echoes eternal tones. When orchids brighten the earth, darkest winter has turned to spring. May this dark grief flower with hope in every heart that loves you. May you continue to inspire us to enter each day with a generous heart, to serve the call of courage and love until we see your beautiful face again in that land where there is no more separation, where all tears will be wiped from our mind, and where we will never lose you again. And let me also offer this prayer. God of grace and glory, we thank you for Paul, who was so near and dear to us, and who has now been taken from us. We thank you for the friendship he gave, and for the strength and peace he brought. We thank you for the love he offered and received while he was with us on earth. We pray that nothing good in Paul's life will be lost, but will be of benefit to the world, that all that was important to him will be respected by those who follow, and that everything in which he was great will continue to mean much to us now that he has died. We ask you that he may go on living in his children, in his wife Liz, his family, his friends, in their hearts and minds, in their courage and their consciences. We ask you that we who were close to Paul may now, because of his death, be even closer to each other, and that we may, in peace and friendship here on earth, always be deeply conscious of your promise to be faithful to us even in death. May God grant us courage and confidence in the life to come. For we ask all of this in the name of the Holy One. Amen.
So I remember Paul he'd come up and, he had this energy, right? He was like a light switch. It was just on. I'm not sure if there was like a slow ramp up, but it was just on. So by the time he saw you, you couldn't feel anything but overwhelmed by this person who just had profound energy. And I kept like telling him, just stop. Like, I'm getting tired watching you. And then I always felt dumber because he just knew stuff. He read books, which I try not to. I mean, if there's a book on tape or like YouTube channel, I'll do that instead. And obviously he was gifted surgically, but he also had no pride when it came to his surgical practice. He'd reach out to anyone that he felt that he could to bring them on so that we won. And we translated to a child getting better or having the best chance to be better. And that is a fantastic example of somebody who I think found that balance between being good and great. He became great because of that. It's something that I think is also uniquely special about him. I'm proud to bring our next person up to be able to say a few words. And Chris Moxham is Paul's youngest brother. I think, obviously I'm not Paul's brother, so I can't give you that insight. But Chris, please, come on up.
Hi. I'd like to just say everyone looks very nice today. And I'd like to remind you that Paul might not have dressed up for you. I attended a few conferences of his when he came to Alberta, and I remember in Jasper, he would attend presentations in shorts, sandals, and a t-shirt. And I would say, "You're going like that?" And he'd say, "Yeah, it's just the keynote." And then I would say, "Who's the keynote?" Romeo Dallaire. No. Paul was a great older brother. We were only in the same school for 1 year, and I was in kindergarten, and he was in grade 6. And on the way to school, he would say, "I'll meet you in the bathroom at 10:30. And he would do it like a sing-song. And so I would remember, meet me in the bathroom at 10:30. And then I would spend the morning watching the clock, and I would eventually go and meet him, and he was always there, and we didn't do anything. It was just, I think it was his idea of being naughty at school. But yeah, it was anyway, it was great. In the summers after school ended, my mom would pack us in the car, and we'd drive to the cottage in Ontario. And from an early age, Paul was my mom's navigator, and we would sneak the dog into a bunch of hotels and motels through the back door. But it was a real learning opportunity. Paul always had things for us to learn on the road, and we'd wake up the last day in Madison, Wisconsin, and he would have us prepared all morning to hit Chicago and Detroit. And back in those days, they were a different world, right? We'd be counting limos and vanity plates. We'd be looking at broken down cars being disassembled by thieves who had backed vans up to them on I-94. We would see police takedowns. But it was all lots of fun, and interestingly enough, I think Matt, our middle brother, and I learned a lot about inequality and poverty and urban decay from those drives. Paul always had something for us to be thinking about. Perhaps my clearest memory. Oh, are you hearing me? Okay. Perhaps my clearest memory is when my mom told me she was going to let me out because I was behaving so horribly in the back of the car. And Paul was her accomplice, and he played along, and he told me it was all going to be okay. Mom would give me some money for the bus, and I would get back home in a few days after them. And I just hope that he was the least bit mortified when she let me out and drove 100 feet up the interstate. Hopefully for just a second there, he was a bit concerned. The trips were pretty funny. 3 days in the car, and my brother Matt used to sleep with an eye open in the car, and Paul and I would dangle things in front of his face, trying to change his dreams. And they were stupid things, like an empty can of 7-Up or a shoe. But it was always fun. We would be laughing our heads off. Much of my sense of humor came from Paul, for sure. I was watching Kentucky Fried Movie, Top Secret, The Holy Grail, all by about age 7 or 8, which probably wasn't appropriate. But Paul was really good about explaining the most important part of the scene, the thing you're missing. When King Arthur's chopped off the knight's legs and arms, and they're still bickering and having this conversation. But that's not the funniest part. The funniest part is the bridge that he just has to cross is this stupid little bridge smaller than this catwalk across a bump in the ground. So anyway, Paul was great for pointing out the funny things. It was not long after I was 7 or 8 that Paul and I started shaving. Yeah. On the same day. He was very good about including me in things, and when he got his first pack of disposable razors, he gave me one and lathered my face up and took the cap off, and I quickly learned not to cut myself. But yeah, he was very good about including me in things. And I remember the whole shaving thing. It was almost embarrassingly absurd. I wouldn't even tell my friends. It was so stupid that I was in grade 5 and I was shaving. It's interesting. Paul never grew a beard until he couldn't shave over the last few months, and we looked a lot more alike then, didn't we? I thought he looked quite handsome. Paul, in many ways, was a tough act to follow, larger than life. Even little things like in junior high, I would have been in like grade 2, and he was the photographer for the yearbook, right? Just taking on little things and going the extra mile. and he'd gone out and bought himself this big Pentax camera with all the accessories and things that Matt and I just weren't allowed to touch, which was probably a good idea. At Henry Wisewood, the high school in Calgary, he was the top student in grades 11 and 12. And he instilled the importance of education in his two children as well, sending them to this fine institution with properly vetted instructors. We remember a drama teacher who went all out for Arabian Nights. Yeah. Anyway, top student twice was not his greatest accomplishment in high school. Many of you might not know this, but Paul really wasted his talents with this being a doctor thing. He was an early computer programmer back in the early 1980s and mid-1980s, and he'd stuck with it. If he'd stuck with it, he would have been a software billionaire 20 years ago. He would create these things, boards that were the equivalent of a website, I guess. And you would call in and you would do messages and you would play video games that were set up. And he would crack open the video game. And one day, we used to play this game called Load Runner, where a guy runs around collecting boxes or something. You know, the technology wasn't that good. And he would open up the game, and one day I'm playing it, and the maze would actually spell my name. And then I'd get to the next level, and it would spell Matt's name. He was quite remarkable. So anyway, that's the background to his most important accomplishment at high school, which was when he and Alan Zugi hacked into the Calgary Board of Education computer system. They worked their way through different levels of security, finally arriving at the password Pascal, and they got into the individual class lists. Not that they needed to. Yeah, you don't know this. Not that they needed to change their grades. It was all academic, I think. But they left a little calling card for the math teacher, Mr. Turley. They changed Alan's name to Buckwheat. Yeah. And some of you might remember the significance of this name, Buckwheat, from that time. Literally 40 years ago tomorrow. And if you asked Paul, you know his memory. If you asked Paul, this is exactly what he would say to you. Yes, of course. On March 12th, 1983, during the filming of Saturday Night Live, Buckwheat was assassinated by John David Stutz. Yeah. Everyone remembers Paul's memory for detail. It actually runs in the family. It's more of a crutch than anything. But yeah. Do any of you have August 16th, 1977 stuck in your head? Look it up. So, pardon me? It's when Elvis died. I don't even like Elvis. Yeah. But every August 16th, I remember him. Yeah. Yes, indeed, a tough act to follow. Even for me as a social scientist, he was remarkably knowledgeable about things going on in the world. He read his Economist weekly. He had a pretty decent grasp of history. For instance, he was very good about introducing me as the real doctor, which is important when I'd meet yet another doctor friend who didn't have a doctorate. Yeah. History matters. I mean, I once told him that surgeons were glorified barbers. I'd lastly like to mention Paul's musical interests, which have already come up. Husker Du, Exploited, Black Flag, Bad Brains, Dead Kennedys, Dead Milkmen. Some have called the music eclectic, anti-establishment, complex, intense, visionary. But many of us just call it shitty. When he told me he played that stuff in the operating room, Oh my goodness. I mean, you hear about patients who are anesthetized, but they're feeling and hearing everything. You hear those stories. And can you imagine if they were hearing that music and thinking about the madman with his hands inside them, right? We did come to a historic accord once over music, or regarding music, that we could agree that Crazy Train was the greatest rock and roll song of all time. And he's got the autographed photo to go with it when he treated Ozzy for laryngitis. While the fans from the canceled concert set about destroying your fine city. Yeah. You're going to hear some great stories about Paul today from many people who knew him better than I did over the last 20 years, which happens when you live at least a time zone apart. I didn't know how to let you know what a great brother he was growing up, other than to make it funny and try to make you laugh like he would. But this is a celebration, and just imagining him being here, how would we celebrate him? And I'd like you all to stand up for a sec. And
Paul also had the knack for being able to make everybody a friend. And in the children's hospital, I would often look at him as a way of being able to... Who here has ever heard of Dale Carnegie? Yeah, I wish I heard of Dale Carnegie. Because Paul was a master at getting people on side, where for me, somehow they have a chair at HR that has the same initials as my name. So it makes for a tough act to follow. Our next speaker or speakers are going to be two people that I think have had a brutal journey, an absolutely brutal journey. And they are Paula and Liz's daughters. And I think, this is a celebration. But I think it's also like a pebble in a pond, and how those ripples just go. And the impact of this, for me, for you guys, is immense. Please come up, talk about your dad.
Hi everyone, so I'm Lindy, I'm Paul's eldest daughter, and thank you so much all for being here today and for being here for my family over the last few months. Back in the fall of 2021, when I was moving out to start medical school and Mallory was moving out to start undergrad, I remember having a conversation with my dad that went something like, "Hey Dad, have you considered it might be time to get a dog? I'm worried you're gonna be kinda lonely when me and Mallory are gone. Do you even have any friends?" I'm glad to say that I was obviously very wrong. It's clear to me that my dad excelled in many areas of his life. However, I think that the role in which my dad most excelled and was most proud of was his role as a father. My dad was always a very enthusiastic parent. He was quick to volunteer to drive us places, help out at school, attend our recitals, track meets, and competitions. However, I think the one thing that really set my dad apart was the great interest that he took in me and Mallory's lives. He always strived to listen to us, to understand us, and help us however he could. I always considered my dad to be one of my best friends, and I know he felt the same about me. My dad taught me a lot. As you know, his memory was second to none, so I grew up with a knowledge of vivid stories from his youth, facts about space that hadn't really been updated since the 1970s, a vast repertoire of songs that no one had ever heard of, filling my brain. But besides these facts and stories that haven't become useful at any trivia night so far, I also learned important values for a life well lived. My dad was friendly and open to everyone he crossed paths with, and he consistently managed to both excel at his career and in his family life, and he managed to keep up with a number of sometimes niche interests, including 19th century Russian literature, international travel, and daily exercise. Most of all, he loved his life and woke up every day with a smile on his face. I'm now going to read an excerpt from a reflective essay that I wrote in high school that I think really captures my relationship with my dad growing up. The prompt was, "Those we admire shape the people we become." Throughout high school, I've run with my father on the weekends and after school in Pacific Spirit Park. Our time together has become increasingly important, as it's the only time I have a long conversation with my father. When I'm home, I have little to talk about to my parents besides school. However, when I'm running, I always feel much more open and receptive to conversation. Through our weekly runs, I've learned a lot about my father and myself. I have a lot in common with my father, from our favorite sports, running and soccer, to favorite school subjects, biology and math. I hope that I have some personality traits in common with my father as well. My father is unfailingly compassionate, both in his career as a physician and as a parent. When he talks about his job, it is clear that he truly cares about the well-being of his patients and their families, and takes time to learn about their likes and dislikes so he can provide individualized, effective, and meaningful care. He never fails to have a personalized joke ready for every patient. Countless people have told me that my father is the only doctor that they actually enjoy and look forward to going to see. My father's empathy impresses me every day. He seems perfectly suited for his career. While many assume that I have familial pressure pushing me into a career in medicine, this could be further from the case. Both my mother and father have gone out of their way to tell me a myriad of times that they do not expect me to become a doctor. In fact, from the time I was 2 years old, my father had me trained to tell everyone who would listen that when I grew up, I wanted to be an investment banker. However, I find it impossible to want to pursue any other profession after seeing the joy that this job brings my father. Every day is a new challenge, but also a new success. I cherish the time that we spend together, as I know that all too soon our forest runs will end when I go to university. Although I will not always be able to spend time with my father, I will always have his advice, compassion, and insight to inspire me every day. Needless to say, I could never have imagined that our time together would be so short. However, I'm so thankful for all the time that I spent getting to know my father over the first 22 years of my life. I know that I will carry the values he instilled with me into the future, and I still have his advice, compassion, and insight to inspire me every day. Thank you all for being here today.
How many of you heard of Paul being a magician? Some of you definitely heard of that, right? The guy could make magic happen. First of all, he showed it every time he actually was talking with someone. I mean, it's pretty impressive. What I think is probably the greatest magical act was him being a normal guy. To pull off being a normal guy. When he wasn't normal, he was brilliant, right? All these things, all these adjectives that we use to be able to talk about someone. But at the end of the day, he was just a normal guy who I would hate going up against in Trivial Pursuit. That was not going to go anywhere well, right? So, I think it's something special, and I want to thank Lindy, and I know Mallory out there as well. I mean, for things that are said and more importantly, what hasn't been said. Because that connection, that bond, those years, that time, everything that you have as a love for your dad, believe me, he knows. Our next speaker is going to be Mark Felton and Jane Lee, who are going to also add to our understanding of what they know about about Paul. And where's Scott, by the way? Scott, can you just stand up for just one moment? For those of you who don't know Scott Durham, Scott was Paul's mentor in a lot of ways. And he'd ask me, Paul would say, what do you think we should do? I said, I don't know. He goes, well, let's ask Scott. Everything was, let's ask Scott. I'm like, how do you tie your shoelaces? I don't know. Let's ask Scott. Can we get Mark up here and Jane?
morning, everyone. Thanks for having us speak today. I feel like I may have needed to have a comedy degree to come up here today, and I'm feeling a little anxious because I'm not as funny as everyone else has been. I will do my best, though. I first met Paul about 20 years ago when I was a medical student. He was a residency program director at the time, and we first met during my interview at UBC. And while the encounter was brief, he really stood out because of his welcoming nature, his casual, informal attire, which I at the time thought was like the coolest thing ever. And I've keenly tried to replicate that over the years, much to the dismay of many in the audience, and you know who you are that always give me a hard time. But it was seriously hard not to wear jeans, a t-shirt, and Birkenstocks today, because I thought that would honor him the best. The most memorable thing about that first meeting was actually that he appeared fit and happy. And you may say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, it's a combination that I actually never saw at any other interviews throughout the country. So time passed, and we didn't cross paths again until 2010 when I came out to UBC to do some fellowship training. Paul was one of my fellowship supervisors, and I think I was his first fellow ever. While he was a skilled and talented surgeon and teacher, his mastery of that tougher, more important, softer side of medicine, of building relationships with and trust with patients and families, was really what he excelled at most, above and beyond the rest. He had a knack of spending 5 or 10 minutes with the family or a patient and making them seem like it was 30 minutes. He knew what sports they played, he knew the names of their siblings, what school they went to, where their last family vacation was. Even he knew the names of their stuffed animal they brought into the clinic. It was truly remarkable. I never saw a note anywhere about these things. He just remembered it all. But he didn't just remember it, he actually cared, and he was interested in patients' lives beyond their ears, nose, and throat. The second area that he excelled at was in undergraduate education. He thrived teaching medical students, and he was always seen going that extra mile between patient encounters, answering questions, spending extra time teaching over lunch. And he did so with endless patience that I aspire to have today, but I do not. And all the while expressing interest in the human being within the medical student, what their aspirations were, what they did for fun. He's mentored people beyond ear, nose, and throat. There's anesthesiologists in the room that were really touched by him as a mentor. He truly found joy in teaching medical students and clearly had a knack for it and a gift for it, as he repeatedly won the annual undergrad teaching award. He even went on a winning streak, and he won 4 times in a row. The third area he excelled at was his ability to achieve a healthy work-life balance and his commitment to fitness. So in many ways, he was a champion of physician wellness, and he led by example, a very, very important side of our practice. He even found unique ways to bring fitness into the operating room. So every now and then he would opt to squat as opposed to sit, and he would challenge me to do my tubes while squatting without a chair, which I found very admirable. As a colleague, after I finished my fellowship training, I often inherited his patients. They would come in their late teens as they graduated from children's to the adult hospital, and as has been said many times before, he is a very tough act to follow. At the end of a recent consultation with one of the patients he referred my way, the parent said to the child, "So I told you Dr. Lee was nice." And the patient kindly responded, "I like Paul Moxham better." So, well, that pretty much sums it up. As a patient, Paul was kind, grateful, and wickedly funny. Even in the worst of times, he was always trying to make things better for those around him, make the nurses and the visitors comfortable. He used his witty humor to make those around himself feel better and to diffuse the tough situation that he was currently in. He was an endless source of jokes and giggles, and this really sheds a bright light on just what kind of person he was. When visiting Paul for the last time in hospital, I was able to have some one-on-one time with him that I will forever cherish. The honesty of that conversation I had with him was so beautiful, it was almost overwhelming. So I ask everyone just to honor Paul today. I ask you each to reflect on something. Reflect on a mentor that has affected your life. Someone who has truly had an impact on you, that's changed your path, and tell them how they impacted you. And I think that's the best way we can honor Paul. Thank you.
And so it's an honor and privilege really to be asked by Liz to talk today. And I'm going to talk really on behalf of all Paul's fellows. Paul taught countless medical students, countless residents, and in the last 10 years or so he had 12 fellows, which he dearly loved. He was a mentor to them, a friend, and extended family. When I was thinking about Paul and our time together, I went back to the first time I met him in 2014 when I was visiting BC Children's pre-fellowship. And we hit it off straight away. It was like, after 2 days, it was like one of my old friends. And I think that's how he treated the majority of students or trainees that came to see him and his colleagues. He was so welcoming. The first thing that struck me about Paul when I first met him was he didn't dress really like a British surgeon, which we loved about him, his green Crocs and his scrub hat and his colourful socks. The second thing was, that strikes you was, oh my gosh, the amount of energy that he had, just this energy that just radiated from him, and so much fun. And then the other thing you notice is how fast he talked. Now, I'm from Liverpool, so I talk fast, but Paul really did talk fast. And I mean, that was part of he was so inquisitive, but also because of his intelligence, that was part of his being so fast. And then when I saw him with patients for that first time, it strikes you quickly how great he was with his patients and how kind he was. And then also watching him in the clinic and how fantastic he was with the rest of the clinic staff really struck. And it really felt like, yeah, I want to do this fellowship. I want to work with Paul, definitely. And it was a great joy to watch that over several years, watching him treat the same visitors in the same way. I think thinking about Paul's approach to his fellows, really you have to think about his own experience in his training. Paul spoke very fondly of the excellent fellowship he did in Melbourne, not just the clinical aspects, but the lifelong friends he met there. Then thinking about his own training in Vancouver, his own mentors and friends, and he would often talk about his mentor, Doug Kibblewhite, and his friend, Caroline Montgomery, and over the years, what he'd learned from them. And I think given the experiences he had as a trainee, and a fellow, him and Liz set out to really take on looking after the fellows. And I spoke to Liz about this before, about how they really wanted to be fellows' extended family when they were a long way away from their own families on fellowship. So in terms of what we learned from Paul, we learned a lot about surgery. We learned a lot about Monty Python and music. Surgical skills. Paul was a keen airway and head and neck surgeon, but he was also a very good otologist. We did a lot of otology cases together. He was great to watch in an emergency or when we had dealt with the many rare cases that we get at BC Children's. He was always calm. He was always collaborative. He was always keen to get anybody involved in the hospital who he think would give the best care for the child. And he also practiced evidence-based medicine. He was always looking for the right journal to treat that rare case that neither of us had seen before. In terms of the non-surgical skills, we could talk for hours about non-surgical skills he taught us, but certainly there's many people in this room and around the world that when they see a nervous or complex child, they think, what would Dr. Paul do? How would he treat them? He had formed great relationships with his everybody in the office, certainly his long-standing office assistants, Nancy and Michelle, and the clinic nurses, and then he cultivated relationships throughout the hospital and the province, which, it is testament to the turnout today. But that not only led to a happy work life. Paul loved being a surgeon at BC Children's, but it also led to a fantastic patient care. I just want to touch on a couple of personal stories that myself and I think a lot of the other fellows can relate to. Paul wasn't just extended family, a mentor. He also was a lot of our family doctor. He would look after our whole family. So certainly, I think I was probably the first person to bring a pregnant, heavily pregnant wife over to on fellowship and in the pediatric ENT department. And Paul quickly referred us to Dr. Rosengarten, who was Liz's obstetrician and provided fantastic care for our family and Paul's family. And then following that for 3 of the other fellows. So I think Paul took a great deal of pride in looking after the whole family. I love the memory of Paul and Liz turning up on in the women's hospital the first day after my daughter was born with pink champagne. And then a couple of months after that, being able to celebrate our first Mother's Day with Liz cooking fantastic food, and Paul being a fantastic host and also making sure everything was cleaned as soon as it could be. Yeah. There's many stories of visits and Skeeter. After his fellows left, he was emails, texts all the time, wanting to know. He was so proud of all his fellows and what they were doing. Educating their own fellows, the residents, and he was always keen to keep up. And there was many emails and pictures. He would always send pictures back and forth to the families. And I think finally, when I came back to Vancouver, he showed his character. Him and Liz showed the character again as when I was his colleague. I was 2 months on my own in Vancouver, and every Saturday, rain or shine, they would turn up in Yale Town at my doorstep saying, "Come on, we're going out for coffee. Hot chocolate for Paul, and we'd go for cake." And they really looked after their fellows, and I'm thankful for that. So I think Paul's legacy was his commitment to education and his trainees and colleagues throughout the province, and certainly that means Dr. Paul's approach to pediatric ENT will live on for many years to come. Thank you.
Now, the way that you've heard Paul spoke fast, and I think he was auctioneer fast. He could speak fast enough that sometimes he didn't make sense to me. I thought maybe it was his accent. And he didn't have an accent. Right? But I do think, we heard from his brother that, he could have been a software engineer and made billions. I think he probably could have sold you anything, is actually what I think he was really meant to do. First of all, he would just bludgeon you with the words that came out so fast, like a machine gun. Secondly, they could sound smart or dumb depending on how he thought. He often made me, they were appropriate, so obviously he was speaking dumb to me. And then at the end of the day, he would say, "Well, what do you think?" I was just trying to take a breath more than anything else. Our next speaker is a long-time patient, family, and friend, and person who has been involved in Paul and their family's life. Deb, come on up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deb. I we know Paul because of my eldest son, Trey, who is 19 and sitting in the front seat. And I've got 4 other kids. Avery's 17, Sadie's 15, Raleigh is 6, and Cora is 4. We met Paul when Trey was 1, before his diagnosis of MPS II. He's got a rare and progressive disease. And as I'm listening to everybody's, like the family and the doctor side of the story, it really occurred to me that my job is to represent the family side. And so coming into BC Children's Hospital, it's a loaded journey. Like even if I anticipate good news, I'm ready for bad news. When Trey was young, we were in the hospital at least twice a week. My mom is also here, and she was there with us. And so I was always emotional. There was always something going on, and it also was regular for us. And oftentimes we'd be at the beginning, Trey had enzyme replacement therapy every week for 8 hours, and somehow, because of Trey's rare disease, he had a lot of ENT issues, so we'd end up in Paul's office. And inevitably, like somebody would be, there was 3 little kids, somebody would be whining or crying, or there was smoothie on somebody's face, or I was crying, or something was going on, and we go into Paul's office, and he was just like, everybody just calmed down, and like, I would just, like, he's so full of respect. Like, there's so many times that I'd as a mom, just a mom, in the hospital system, I was treated as less than, and I'm even called mom, and he would call me Deb, and he had a lot of nicknames for me too. He would talk to me, would look me in the eyes. He helped me advocate numerous times, and I would try to figure out, like, am I being told no because of policy? Am I being told no because of Trey's safety? And he would be honest with me. And then he'd sit all of my kids up on the chair, and they looked forward, like even my daughter Sadie's here. And my son Avery's working, he can't be here today, but he was so meaningful to all of us that like everybody knows him and remembers him. And yeah, he was just funny. He made us laugh at the end of like a long, exhausting, scary, overwhelming, boring day. And I don't even know when it started, but we've done a lot of fundraisers and research into MPS II and rare disease. And he started coming to our fundraisers. And at the beginning, like the fundraisers were close. I remember the first run, Liz and Paul and the entire family came. And it was literally close family and close friends. And then Paul and family came. And I think that was sort of the beginning of something that grew. And when Paul got sick, I was living in LA at the time for school, and I had to come back to get Trey's medication because I was doing home infusions in LA. And I would come back just for the night, and I'd stay at the airport hotel, and my friends would come to see me, but I would go to see Paul. And because that's the impact he had in our life. And beautifully, and it's been such an honor to get to know Liz. Recently, like this week, one of my favorite memories, I don't think I'll ever forget it, was we were trying to connect, and I was trying to come over, and it didn't happen. And she's like, let's just FaceTime, and like we'll lay on the ground, and we'll like get pillows and blankets, and I'll never forget it. And I was like, if I'd known this about Liz sooner, like I would have wanted to, like, yeah, come over more often, sooner and earlier. I was talking with a couple of other doctors, and I think, just today, it's so hard going to Children's now without him there. Trey had to go into hospital. The first time Trey had to go into hospital after Paul passed, he needed to see an ENT because when his hearing aids aren't in, he'll stick things in his ears, and his ear was bugging him. And I messaged Liz, and it's just not the same. It's like the energy, as so many people have spoken to, the energy is different. And we have a lot of wonderful, Raju is one of our other fave doctors too, and it's like so many of Trey's people are here, and it's been so heartwarming to see it, and I just feel supported and connected here too. But yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same, and we're gonna miss him a lot. Thanks.
So when I was in first year medical school, there was a cardiologist by the name of Frank Mizgala who was teaching us clinical skills. And he said, style and substance. Style and substance. He goes, right now, none of you have substance. So you better all have style. So I came in a suit today, right? Because I figured the substance is gone. And it just hit me that Paul was the exact opposite. He didn't need the style piece because his substance was rock solid. I think that's pretty cool. And the other thing that I was thinking of was what he really brought to, and Deb, you mentioned this, he was like this oasis of calm. He was like the Taj Mahal. Like you just went there and everything just, I'll stay here forever. Like, this is a pretty good spot. And I think that's pretty cool. Again, as a reflection of somebody that just knew what you needed at that time. Our next speakers are two people that are fantastic human beings as well. They worked in anesthesia with him. Great people, Miles Cassidy and Andrew Morrison. Both you guys.
Hello, everybody. I get to go first. I'm Andrew Morrison. I'm a friend and colleague of Paul's, one of the anaesthetists at Children's Hospital, and I'm honoured and very delighted to be here, a chance to share some thoughts and stories with you all. And when Liz told me that Paul had asked for me to speak here along with Miles, it did cross my mind to ask why he would want two grumpy, snarly, cranky Scotsmen not known for their elegant or flowery prose to comment on him. And I think he knew we would shoot straight and convey the sense of him in his second home, the operating room, to you all. I hope so. He was that rare diamond of a surgeon, and I'm not a big fan of surgeons. I'm not a surgeon. Sometimes. The one who had the skill and the focus to conquer the most technical of challenges, and yet be cheerful and compassionate and fun, and bring his personality to the room, and more importantly to the kids and the families, even if it was just for a simple ear tube. Made no difference. His memory for each patient, as you've heard already so many times, was unbelievable. He knew their favorite book and where they'd come from and their dog's name and their dog's everything. Paul led the team brilliantly, but he never talked up or down to anyone. Everyone was the same. Everyone felt safe and secure at work in the room, and everything was easier and more rewarding as a result. Rachel, one of our junior nurses who's since moved to the US, wrote a memory of him, and she recalled that he knew everything about every nurse, every aide, every operating technician, the cleaners. I think Mohinder was going to come today, one of our cleaning staff. She also remembers that. And remembers him very fondly. He always had time for anyone and found great delight in everyone. The senior nurses, of course, that lot, they knew and worked with him for a lot longer and fondly reminded me of how his lean and lithe and athletic figure and how he could dislodge his crock from his foot, or his clog from his foot, I should say, with great dexterity, and lift his leg to I can't do it. Lift his leg to 90 degrees and with his big toe turn the cautery up so they didn't have to bother them. And so years ago, I've known him for 16, 17 years, but years ago the dashing young surgeon could do it all, except as it turned out when he tried to remove a mole from his own thigh. And this is Winnie reminded me of this, but he prepped and draped himself after injecting some local anesthetic into his leg, and set about with his finest knife skills to take this thing out. Well, the blood drained not just from his leg, but from the rest of him too. And if it wasn't for a passing resident who saved the day, I'm not sure exactly what would have happened. Thanks, Winnie. Yeah. And as a friend, he was the bestest of friends, right? We didn't need to call each other incessantly or text each other, but we caught up when we caught up. I think a lot of people have that experience. And conversations picked right back up where they'd left off, and we did battle for proudest father as we sort of swapped boastful stories of the kids, basically. As anaesthetists, we get the pleasure of working for periods with our surgical colleagues, but with Paul and swapping these stories, about the kids and so on. He had plenty of those about his kids. And just passing time or jokes with him was always made the operating slate a day I looked forward to. And on the rare occasion when the proverbial hit the fan, his actions saved lives. And only recently, just months, I think, before he stopped working properly, we had such a moment with a little kid and a big piece of plastic in a trachea, which had suddenly and completely blocked the airway. And the other anesthetists, because we'd called for help a little bit, Stefan and Nigel and I had nothing we could do. And I said, Paul, you need to do your stuff. You need to do your thing. He did. The kid lived. The kid was fine. And everyone, including one more small human in British Columbia, breathed again. I'll miss my friend. Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Miles, as Raju said. It's kind of tough now because you guys have heard so much amazing stuff about this guy who is described as normal. He's not normal. Like, the guy had a celebrity who is his super fan. Like, it's supposed to be the other way around, you know? I was first introduced to Paul by him, actually. Walked past and just poked his head in and said, that's Paul, he's one of the good guys. And I didn't think much more of it. But the next 10 years, he was totally one of the good guys, always there. Things I won't miss, the music's been mentioned. Chris, I'm with you entirely there. That's just genuinely awful. So I think you might have some of the opportunity to get sample it later on, but we'll see. And the other thing, single worst Scottish accent you've ever heard in any way. I'm just going to very briefly tell a couple of stories that highlight some key moments for me, because he was a guy that knew people. And I don't mean new people as in all of you guys who are here. He knew a lot of people. But he really knew people. So we had a patient coming in the room. We have a little huddle at the start of every day. And it's really one of those, have we got the right stuff? Do we have the right people? Do we know what we're doing? And it's usually a fairly kind of procedural sort of approach. And we sat there, and Paul would always have those extra details. So he sat there and he said, you know, this one girl is a really important thing about this. So my ears are on. I'm like, right, I better be on my game here. And he said, yeah, she'd been wanting this bike for about 6 months. It was her birthday last week. She got it. He ran through the color, and the annoying things, he would remember all these details. I don't remember them. There was definitely something unicorn related involved in this bike. So the huddle happens. Everyone thinks fine. This young lady comes into the room, and one of the nurses, I can't remember which one, but just threw out oh, I hear you've got a really cool bike. The whole room changed. Like, this little kid who had kind of been coming in, you know, hiding behind parent and stuff, all of a sudden is in the room and like, yeah, I've got a bike. And it's my bike. And she's chit, no problem, off to sleep, has her operation, wakes up afterwards, goes home. And take away all the technical bits and pieces, because you kind of hope all of that's a given. That little moment just, to me, changed that family's entire day. And I think it speaks a little bit to what Deb was saying. You know, just little things that make huge differences. And he made huge differences to us as well. There's, going back to the whole, I can't remember the singer's name. He's quite famous though, isn't he, that you guys know? Anyway, the family were invited to go and see this chap do his thing. And Paul came back up. And I was like, so how was it? You know, it was really good, expecting, you know, good details of the show. And he says, yeah, it was amazing. He's got this guy that works with him. I was like, all right. And he goes, like, he used to be in the army, and he's now like security and stuff. And do you know, he stood there and we chatted for like 10 minutes, and he told me every exit in the room, and he told me how he was going to get people out, and he told me how he was assessing people coming. And it just, to me, was a fascinating 30 minutes or so in the OR. And but secondly, I was just thinking, this guy's genuinely different. Like, he met this person who's a completely peripheral part of the process, learned everything about him, not because he's nosy or gossipy, but just because he had a genuine interest in this human being. And that's the bit I'll miss out of everything else. So, thanks.
I remember Paul told me about that certain star that Liz and them were going to go see. And he just went on and on and on and on about it. Hey, did you hear we're going to the show? Yeah, I heard. Hey, did you hear? I don't know if any of you saw Saturday Night Live with Mr. Short-Term Memory with Tom Hanks. If you haven't, go back, watch it. Hey, did you hear about this show that we're going to watch? But the thing that I found interesting was that Paul was a rock star in a lot of ways, right? The one that was a quiet rock star. You didn't really expect it. But he had all the pieces. Like I said, the light just seemed to be shining down on him. And something that you may not know is that he changed his work schedule to be able to make his family work. And that's amazing. I don't know how many of you are in high investment careers where there seems to be demands constantly. But to go and tell your peers and your bosses, yeah, you know, this is what I'm going to do. This is foreign. It's still foreign. It's tough. But he did that. He did that up front, you know, and I think that that's amazing when somebody can do that. You know, and I was just thinking to myself, you know, when you also heard this. He did one thing amazingly well. He took your stress away. One of the things you don't want when you're in trouble and you're asking for help, you don't want people to put obstacles in your path. You don't want to make yourself feel like you're begging for a favor. Paul just made it easy. He just said, sure. And right away, that took a lot of that stress, that burden away. And he carried it without much of a problem. It's my privilege to invite Alison Schmelke to come up, and who's a family friend. Really looking forward to what you have to say.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay. I think I'm having a hot flash, and I'm probably showing too much cleavage, so I know I can feel Paul giving me the side eye and the smirk right now, because he would expect no less from me, I don't think. My family and I had the privilege, I call it a privilege, of being patients of Paul's, but also neighbors and friends with the Moxham family. So my speech might be a little less reverential than some of yours, but I've actually written it as a letter to Paul. Dear Paul, I actually can't remember if we met each other first as neighbors or as patients, because that summer of 2006 is so fuzzy and yet perfectly clear in my mind. We moved into our house across the street from you, and then our baby Mary was born, and your presence in our lives after that was constant and comforting. We were more than neighbors or patients, we were friends. My first impressions of you remained steadfast throughout our entire relationship. You were dependable, honest, conscientious, and so smart. As the friendship and interconnectedness between our families grew, those characteristics always stayed at the forefront. Oh, the memories. Right now, when I think back on them, so many images flit across my mind, and they're all bathed in a golden haze. But they were golden days, I know that now. As hard and scary as some of them were, I always knew we were in it together, just a phone call or a knock on the door away. After Mary's first year, when things settled down, and I think there's many of you in the room that might remember baby Mary. She was born with a condition that necessitated her having a tracheotomy for the first year of her life. After that year, we began to spend time together as families and not just as your patient. Your girls are the same age as our first two. The kids all went to school together, and everyone became great friends. I know that you and I were very different on the surface, Paul. I was always running late. How many times you got to see me in my nightie when you came for us to walk to school together. I was always a little frazzled, my heart on my sleeve, having that extra cocktail when you had long ago transitioned to water. Not washing my hands before giving the kids after-school cookies. But we saw in each other the same core value in our families before all else, and we worked well as a parenting team when we needed to. We did so many things together as families, and with other wonderful families that are in this room today that became traditions. So many school recitals, chess club, pizza parties, hip-hop dance classes, impromptu ear cleanings, skiing together, grad celebrations, Christmas Day together for Lindy's birthday, always one of the most special days of the year that we look forward to. Thank you for sharing that day with us, Lindy. Sharing travel stories and recommendations, Halloweens, birthday parties, walks, adult dinners, deeper conversations as the kids got older, their plans, our worries and fears. You would send me random photos that popped up on your phone in the middle of the day of when we walked the kids to school together on the first day in 2007. It always stopped me in my tracks, brought me back to what was really important. When you got sick, it was an opportunity to connect more deeply. I think I knew what your greatest fear was because I share it. Leaving the ones that you love, your family, your people. Will they be okay? What will I miss? What will I miss, and will they be okay? Well, Paul, they will be okay. They will be okay because they have you. They have you in every holiday memory, tradition, ritual, and routine. Every time they go skiing, every time they get a flu shot, maybe every time they wash their hands. You were there, and you will be there because you always showed up. In the good times, the bad times, and the in-between times, you showed up to offer whatever you could, and that, my friend, is what I will take from you going forward. Show up, be of service when you can, do your best, and love each other.
I'll just get my papers back from Allison. Talk amongst yourselves. So there's this thing that I say that it's easy to be friends when times are good, but friendship is defined by what you do when times are bad. Paul is that guy, right? I also think that you heard over and over and over again that he seemed to know all the little details about every single person out there. Personally, that's the definition of a stalker. I don't know, but kind of freaks me out a little bit. Irv Pathak is going to be our next person who's going to speak, and Irv and Paul were residents, I think, at the same time. And obviously, their friendship has gone on and on and on and on and on until he gets up here on.
Thanks, Raju. Yeah, thanks. Paul and I were best friends for 30 years. So we were ENT residents together, and Paul was everything that you would want in a friend. He was loyal when I needed it, reliable, full of sage advice. But the best part was his awesome sense of humor and his general quirkiness. What a character. Paul was a laugh a minute. Whenever we would meet up, it was all fast, loud talking and laughing until my face hurt. And I'll tell you, we were so loud and so boisterous, Liz couldn't stand being around us. It's absolute true, and I don't blame her, because I think we annoyed a lot of people. And I don't think there were many people who could stand being around us. And I couldn't tell you what we were talking about. We talked about everything, and we talked about nothing. And what I do remember, though, is I always felt happy when I was around Paul. And Paul was quirky in the best way possible. We would go to these ENT meetings in different cities, and we would always share hotel rooms. And looking back, I think it must have been hard for Paul to share a hotel room with me, because I was all chaos and mess, and Paul was not. And honestly, this is true. We would often have two single beds in these hotel rooms, and this happened multiple meetings. And he would go to sleep literally lying flat with the covers up to here, and he would be staring at the ceiling and say, "Good night," and close his eyes. Meanwhile, I'd be on the other bed, wrapped in my blanket like a burrito, as Paul would often say. And when the morning came, I was on my bed, and the pillow had drool on it. It was on the floor. The duvet was wrapped in a circle, on the end of the bed, and I was like perpendicular in the bed, lying half off. And in fact, in the middle of the night, oftentimes I would fall off the bed. And in fact, that's what Paul always used to tell people about me, that I had cat-like reflexes. It's true, and people would wonder, what? And it's because he always said whenever I fell out of bed, I would always land on all fours. And I would wake up kind of in a haze, my hair all over the place, and I'd look over, and Paul would be in the same exact position. He'd be there with nary a crease on the duvet. And he would do this, that was a good night's sleep, let's go. And Paul, everybody's heard Paul's a great guy. Oh, he's so fantastic. But I'll tell you, everybody has a secret. And I bonded with Paul early on when we were in our 20s. We were surgery residents. We thought we were going through a hard time. And I knew Paul was it. And one time he was about to sit down and type something at a computer. And before he started, he turned to me in this really solemn way, and he said, "Irv, I've got a secret that I don't want anybody else to know about, but I'm going to tell you, and you're about to see it." And I was like, okay, this is it. This is my best friend, and this is going to be something I'm going to take forever and never reveal to anyone. And he said, "Irv, I'm a really fast typist." And I was like, I didn't really know why he was worried about that, but I was like, okay, this is it. My best friend has entrusted me with this. And he was an incredibly fast typist. And as everybody has said, I think it's because his brain worked so fast, right? And, the residency years went by, and there would be occasion when I'd wanted to bring this up. And, we might be sitting there with one of the other residents who was hunting and pecking with a finger, probably like, I don't know who, probably Tom Bonacici, I would suspect, probably types that way. And, I would about to say something, and I would look at Paul, he would look at me, and I remember my vow. The years went by. Paul went to Australia, then he went to Vancouver. I went to a bunch of places, ended up in Toronto. And I was always flying around different places, giving talks at these interminable medical meetings. I was in Atlanta once. This is many years later. And this Australian surgeon comes up to me after the talk, thanks me about the talk. And he said, I met Paul once or twice when he was in Australia, and your name came up. And I said, oh, well, that's nice. And then there was an awkward silence, which, Paul never had, but I had with every person I've ever talked to in my life, I think. And, he was looking like this, and I was looking at my feet. And all of a sudden, this surgeon from Australia kind of furtively looks around and leans in a conspiratorial way that only an Australian could do, and says, "Nobody knows this, but do you know Paul's a very fast typist?" I was like, what? So Paul was mischievous. He went for the long joke, when you're making memories, you don't know you're making memories. And I just thought it would last forever. And when I was in Sydney, Australia, Paul had been there the prior year, and he actually came to Melbourne to visit. And I flew from Sydney to Melbourne to see him. And we spent a week in Melbourne. And he picked me up in style in this blue BMW Roadster, you know, with the convertible with the top down. And we stayed in this really fancy hotel and in Melbourne. And every day we'd, you know, throw the keys or hand the keys to the valet parking and walk in. And we drove around Melbourne and the Mornington Peninsula. And the thing that Paul always remembered, and I know this because he always mentioned it, is that every time we passed a school bus full of children, we would always get like the thumbs up and yeah about our car. And Paul was always saying, oh, wow, we're so popular with Australian school children. And, you know, it was because Paul was kind of a kid himself. You know, he could appreciate those things. And yeah, so there's so many things that I could talk about. You know, Paul was such a warm guy, especially in this latter kind of year and a bit. He would always finish off conversations with me by saying, I love you. Really sweet. And I would always be thinking, oh, God. What do I say? Like, thank you? Like, goodbye? You know? I eventually figured it out, but he was a really sweet guy that way, actually. So there were lots of visits, lots of fun times. Sorry, there was lots of fun times, and you know, I could tell you so many stories. Meeting at the Moxham cottage, where I think the main activity was actually standing around and watching the Paul's younger brothers, Chris and Matt, never wearing shirts, always eating burgers that were this big. You know, meeting up in Maui when the kids were all little. And I remember my son, who was 2, having a nap by the pool under the umbrella. And Mallory was about 5. And, you know, little kids are always interested in littler kids. And Mallory was always like, who's that guy over there? What's that guy doing? When's that guy going to wake up? And lots of visits to Victoria for the 10K they would come for, and ice cream at Beacon Hill. But, you know, friendship with Paul was more than that. And I will try to tell you the last thing he ever told me. I came over on the ferry on New Year's Day to visit Paul. He was in the hospital by then, and things were starting to get difficult. We had a good visit. We talked about old times, and we talked about things that mattered to him most. You know, for him, that was mainly his daughters, family. And the last thing he ever said to me, he leaned over as I was gathering my things about to leave. He leaned in and he said this. He said, Irv, I hope something as terrible as this never happens to you. I couldn't believe it. And, you know, as usual, I didn't know what to say. And all I could think of saying is, God, Paul, you know, how can you think of somebody else at a time like this? But he did. And he always did. And how can you have a better friend than that? Thanks.
Yeah. So that rock star that I was mentioning, the one that Paul kept talking that they were going to go on and on and on about them going to see, well, we have a pre-recorded video message from Michael Bublé. And he's watching. So, feel free. Hit it!
This is the first time I think either of us have been part of something like this, but Paul is unique, so why not have something like this where we all meet to say what we feel like? Paulito is a generous, beautiful human being who never hesitated to lend a hand to anyone who's in need. Paul is just an incredibly passionate man who always wanted to make the world a place, and he did whatever it took to do so. He was always going out of his way for people, and it didn't matter how big or how small the task. He was an inspiration to anybody who knew him. He walked in and lit up every single room he ever walked into. Everybody says the same thing about him. He was an incredibly special man, and his spirit will live on in our hearts forever, in everyone's heart. And I think I speak for my wife and my kids and probably anybody else who ever knew him, that we just feel so damn lucky to have been a part of his life. Because we need more Pauls. We need way more Pauls out there. And I'm gonna miss him every single day. Every day.
Miss him too.
We love you guys.
We love you.
So Paul and I would see each other from time to time at the Children's Hospital, and we'd talk and you catch up. And Andrew said it best, right? With people that you care about, you just pick up where you left off, and you just carry on. And I remember it was different. I didn't get a text from him. I didn't get a phone call from him. I got an email from him. And he said, Raju, I'm having headache. What do you think? I said to him, Paul, get your ass to VGH tomorrow. I'll set it up. You'll get your scan. Let's figure out why you're having your headache. So that was a Tuesday. Remember, the Wednesday, everything was set up. And he didn't come. I was a little pissed at my friend, right? Why wouldn't you? You kind of go out of your way. I'm being honest, right? Come on, dude. We just set this all up for you. Remember, I talked to him. He goes, my headache went away. I felt okay. He went to a clinic. He said, I was a busy clinic. I don't think his headache went away. He just had a busy clinic. He was doing his thing. And then Friday night, I remember I got a text that he had a seizure and that Liz and Paul were at Vancouver General. And I remember reaching out to my friends as well over at VGH. And it happened to be Serge Makarenko who was on call. And I talked to Serge and said, Serge, my buddy Paul is with you. He's just had a seizure. And you take care of things. He got his MRI that night. He had his surgery done with Peter Gooderum and with Serge. And it just takes something out of you, right? When somebody that you care about is going through something. I remember I was worried about him constantly, right? Wouldn't tell him, because of course, why would you carry that burden? And I remember that, he went through surgery, and as Irv said, I don't know how many times he said, I love you, man, to me. I swear to God it was the steroids, right? He was manic on the steroids, right? Like he always wanted to give, Peter and I were just talking about it, he always wanted to give you a hug. He was giving hugs to everybody, right? Constantly. It's like, dude, I get you. I had a slightly different response. I said, I love you, man, back to him. Right? So every time, it was almost like an attack. I love you too. The greatest gift that I think that he had was to be able to go back to work with a diagnosis that he knew, pain that he was going to feel, but he was able to go back and be in that place of belonging, somewhere where he felt home when he wasn't at home. So I want to thank Serge and Peter and his oncologist and everyone along the way that gave him and Liz and Lindy and Mallory and everyone in this room the time that he had to be able to say, I love you to all the people that matter to him. The final speaker is somebody who I think can go on and on and on about your husband. Liz, come on up.
Does anybody need any more cutting edge? shoes. Have you ever woken up in the morning to find that you have 100 new text messages and then discovered they're all heart emojis? I look out at all of you. I see family. I see friends. I see Paul's colleagues, Paul's patients, his hospital family. And I know there are friends and family from across Canada, across the US, and across the world who are here too. And you've been with us through our journey. Thank you for being here. For being here to remember Paul, for being here as we adjust to life with Paul on our shoulders, in our hearts, in our minds, and in our actions. You've heard a lot about him today. You've heard about Paul as a brilliant big brother, a divine dad, a terrific teacher, a cherished children's doctor, a colorful colleague, a fabulous family man, a true friend. And he was my friend too. And he was my husband, the father of my children, my partner, the encyclopedia of my life, and my wine cellar, which I did forget to ask him what the contents of are. He was my travel planner, and he was my love. When we got married nearly 30 years ago, we told each other that we'd love each other, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, and through joy and sorrow. At the age of 24, we really didn't have a clue what we were getting ourselves into. This past May, we renewed our vows in Las Vegas, surrounded by new friends, including Mike and Lou. And this time we said the same thing. And this time we knew that we could make it through sickness and health, for better and for worse, and that joy and sorrow can be felt at the same time. And we knew we'd do it all again, with our eyes wide open. This past Christmas, our final one, I told him the same words one more time. And I told him that I loved him to the bottom of my heart, and that I'd love him forever. And he told me I was his one true love, and that loving me was easy. Trust me, it was not always easy. As with any 35-year relationship, life wasn't always easy for us. For me, it wasn't always easy to live with a guy who mixed black and white and red laundry in the same load. It wasn't always easy for me to live with a guy who cleared the dishes from our friends before they were finished eating, including my boss. It was not always easy to live with a guy who cleaned every room in the house in a circular motion and always missed the same corners. I did not like cleaning. It wasn't always easy to live with a guy who was perpetually on time when I was not. And it was not always easy to live with a guy who hated egg salad sandwiches. Fuck egg salad sandwiches, said Paul in the hospital. And there was some other stupid stuff, like an impending empty nest, COVID, menopause that goes on and on and on. But when Paul had a seizure and stopped breathing in front of Mallory and me on September the 18th, 2021, and then 2 days later woke up laughing after enduring 6 hours of brain surgery, all our petty squabbles fell away. And soon I started to get amazing advice. My friends, they told me to focus on what was right in front of me. Don't look too far ahead. You don't know where you're going, and you don't know when you're getting there. They told me that we can adapt to living with a new level of stress. They told me we can do hard stuff. They told me to sit with all of our emotions, to sit with the sadness and the fear and the anger, not to brush them aside nor to wish them away, but to ride through them. They told me to live my values during the relatively easy times and when times got hard. So I identified my values: compassion, gratitude, love, and joy. I valued compassion for myself and my girls and for Paul. Paul and I were together for 24 hours a day for almost 16 months, except for the minutes he was having radiation on his brain and the few hours in the days, in the few months that both he and I got to go back to work. Might not have always been easy to be kind and compassionate to each other, spending so much time together, but it was so easy. We quickly learned that we were still each other's best friends, and he had more than one, and that is okay. I valued gratitude. I was grateful for every little thing, for holding hands on walks in the forest and at the beach, for quiet naps on the couch, for dinners with our daughters. And for our evening routine, we would rub each other's feet and each other's backs, and we'd play cribbage, and we would watch the Great Canadian Bake Show, and the Great Australian Bake Show, and the Great British Bake Show, and the Kids British Bake Show, over and over and over. And frankly, sometimes he'd sleep through it, and I couldn't move because we were holding each other's hands, and I'd have to keep watching it. I loved it. Made me laugh, made me smile. And every night before going to sleep, we would each think of 5 things that we were grateful for during the day. And even on the hardest of days, there was something to be grateful for. I valued love because when it comes right down to it, love is the most important thing. And when we really opened ourselves to love in the 16 months of Paul's illness, we found it grew all around, for ourselves, for each other, for all of our friends and our family. And I valued joy. I made it my mission to seek and find and bring joy to Paul every single day. So compassion, gratitude, love, and joy became my mantras, as did living in the present. Not pining for the past, not fretting about the future, but living now, and even now. Paul shared all of these values, and although he couldn't live in the present quite the way that I could, he definitely came along for the ride. Our greatest joy was reconnecting with our friends. Before Paul got sick, we led a quiet life, devoted to our kids, our careers, and our sleep. Before Paul got sick, it was really hard to get me and Paul out of the house in the evening. But when he got sick, I felt an urgent need to do two things, to build up my love bucket and to build a community of support to help us live through such unthinkable times. And to help Paul understand that Lindy and Mallory and I would be okay if the worst thing happened. We shared with our friends what was happening because Paul didn't want secondhand information circling like a broken telephone. He quickly learned how much he valued the connections with our friends during this time. He quickly learned he did not want to walk this path alone. And so did I, and so did you. Paul became a bit softer. He hugged our friends, as you've heard. He told you that he loved you, that he appreciated you. You are our community of support. I know you're here for Paul. I know you're here for my girls. And I know you're here for me. This is cranberry juice. Through Paul's illness and in the 9 weeks and 1 day since he died, I've often said that we've been held up by 1,000 hands, and here you are. And I know that there are 1,000 hands outside of this room too. Now I need a moment. And some of that Kleenex that I gave away. Sorry, anybody out there who could hear that. Being able to spend so much time with Paul over the 16 months he was sick filled up my love bucket. I loved Paul and he loved me until my bucket was overflowing. And then I got a bigger bucket. And the love kept growing. The love kept growing between us through the easy times and the hard times. And I want to thank you all for loving Paul. Thank you for loving our girls. Thank you for filling up our love buckets even higher and for holding us up. When Paul got sick, I knew I wanted to remember our journey, no matter where it may take us. So I started taking pictures of nearly everyone who walked through the door. I might have missed a few, and for that I am sorry. Please forgive me. All the joy you brought into our lives during this time is palpable in the photos. So we have 2 more slideshows to share. The first is a compilation of photos that I took of friends from the day Paul got sick until the day his body left us. The second, and that proves we actually have friends, Lindy. The second is of Paul and Lindy and Mallory and me and our family during the same time. And then the final word is Paul's, which we'll explain after the slideshow. But before we get to the slideshows, I have 2 requests of you. First one is, please let today be the day that you firmly put Paul on your shoulders, in your hearts, in your memories, and remember him in your actions. Second, please talk about him to us. Please talk to Lindy and Mallory about their dad. He is part of each and every one of us in this room, but especially he is part of me and Lindy and Mallory. We will always carry him with us. Talking about him doesn't remind us that he died. It lets us know that you remember that he lived. I'm done. You're almost done with us. The next minute is a toast that Paul gave on New Year's Eve to our friends Chris Ferguson and Cooper, a 19-year-old who gave up his New Year's Eve with friends to share it with Paul, and his brother Chris, and Lindy and me were there. And he said things in that room that he said to everyone. And so this toast is meant for all of you.
Slaughtering. Okay, to friends and family and to everyone's health, thank you for coming and being here. It is a great blessing, and I am very personally appreciative of everyone's standing by me during this difficult time and supporting Liz and the girls. So I hope you all have a wonderful New Year's Eve, and that the next year is markedly better than this one has been, at least for me.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers, Paul.
Cheers. Thanks, Dad. Thank you, sweetie.
I want to thank the Moxham family for the privilege and the honor of being here and serving in this role. More importantly, I want to thank my friend Paul, and hope I've honored you through everything that you've come to mean to me. Thank you to all of you that have joined us here. I think it's immense for the family to know the depth of your love and your kindness for them. Thank you also to West Point Grey Academy for giving us the space to be able to do this, and to Nancy Camardi and her husband Andrew. If you haven't had a chance, Paul's favorite and amazing scones are still out there. So thank you to Jaslyn and Mixed Bakery, and to Being Around the World on 10th, and Max Athwell for that. Nikki at Venusia Floral for the beautiful flowers. And also final thanks to all the organizers and people that have helped along the way for this. I appreciate you coming. Remember him in your hearts, carry him in your thoughts, and continue to be good people. Thank you.
And this is his music. This is Paul's music, so you may want to run fast.